How We Develop AI Will Shape the Future of Society. In this guest lecture, Anthony Aguirre joins Beatrice Erkers to explore the distinction between tool AI and replacement AI, and how this framing can inform AI policy, governance, and strategy. He will also share insights on the risks and thresholds of AGI, the role of capability, agency, and autonomy in AI development, and what it means to keep the future human as AI systems become more advanced and integrated into society.
I'm very happy to be able to introduce Professor Anthony Aguirre. Maybe, Anthony, you would just like to start with introducing yourself to everyone and telling us a little bit about all the work that you've been doing throughout your career.
Yeah, so historically, I've been a theoretical physicist, but in the last 10 years or so, I've gotten drawn more and more into the AI and thinking about the huge implications that it has and what we can do to make, if we've got this giant transformation coming, what we can do to make that go more positively. So I founded with a few others back in 2014, the Future of Life Institute, and that has been most of what I've been doing for the last several years. I'm now executive director of that. And along the way, I've done a few other things, founded Metaculus, the prediction platform, partly to think about AI and AGI, but also to think about all sorts of other fun technology stuff. And generally switched my mode of thinking over to how do we understand AI, AGI, intelligence, what sorts of policies would be useful. I was never a policy expert through my careers in theoretical physics, but I've learned more than I ever cared to about policy and how to think about it in terms of AI. Gotten interested in lots of stuff and very excited about thinking about how the future is going to play out and how we can think about the future. And so excited to be here as part of this world building course.
Yeah, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for supporting this course also, I should say. Yeah, so basically one of the key focus of this course is just like imagining what a future with AI could look like if it goes relatively well, hopefully. And you recently wrote this essay called Keep the Future Human, and it was very cool. I read it. There's also, I know there's like a video and a really cool interactive summary that I went through that I can highly recommend people go to. It's that keepthefuturehuman.ai. But do you want to maybe share, like, why did you write this essay now? Why are you focusing so much on this? What's the inspiration, basically?
I wrote it because I think AI is being developed at an incredible rate. It's going to continue to be developed at one level or another. And I think rather than think of just AI or more AI or less AI, we should be thinking about what kinds of AI we actually want to develop and are there directions that we want to choose as we develop more and more powerful systems that are going to make things go better for humanity. And so the title is really about, can we choose a direction that keeps the future firmly in human hands? What does that look like as opposed to turning it all over to these ever more powerful machines? And that, as we talk about AGI and systems that can fully reproduce the range of intelligence that humans has, that becomes a really central question. If they can do all of the things that humans can do, what are the humans doing anymore? And especially if they're starting to do it a lot better. And so I wrote it to analyze the question and raise an alternative to the track that we're on, which is building AGI and superintelligence. And we can talk about my conception of what those mean. But can we then instead choose to not replace people and humanity with these machine intelligences, but rather to think about how AI can be used as a tool, as many technologies have before, so that it is extending human capabilities, allowing us to do things that humans couldn't do before with this new technology, allowing us to do things at a scale that we couldn't do before, but keeping humans centrally in the causal chain. Like humans are still in charge. The things that are being done are human things done by humans with tools that are empowering them. And so my belief is that is possible, that we can recognize and make that choice. And Keep the Future Human is my attempt to lay out the fact that choice exists, what it would look like to not build AGI and superintelligence and instead build tools, how we can do that sort of in terms of policy and what that looks like in terms of the future a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to deep dive into here. I think the first thing I'll just ask is that when, for example, I've said this because tool AI is a big focus of this course. People that are very involved in this field are saying that it's not possible. It's not an alternative. We're already on this trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say about that?
Yeah, so the thing that I have started to feel is that a lot of the problem is that we think about AI just in this one-dimensional sense of lesser or more. And as you crank up the AI dial, you get things that are just more powerful and more capable in all sorts of ways. And once the dial gets turned up high enough, or the thing gets high enough, then you have AGI that can do all the things that the humans can do, and then keep going and you get to superintelligence. And it's this very one directional thing. You just get to crank up the intelligence level. And I think it's obvious that is a terrible way to think about intelligence, because intelligence has so many different facets to it. And it's clear that already we have systems that are superhuman in some ways. AlphaFold folds proteins better than any human or other computer system, and subhuman in other ways that systems still can't. I think they can now count the R's in strawberries, but they definitely can't do anything that a human, that is like a complicated thing that a human takes even 10 or 20 minutes to do. It's hard for a machine to, or an AI system to do reliably. And so there are huge differences in like different dimensions of intelligence. One thing that I felt was quite useful, a way to decompose it, is to think about AGI not as artificial general intelligence, but as autonomous general intelligence. And in particular, to think of intelligence like the ability to do tasks really well, like AlphaFold folding proteins, generality, the ability to do many sorts of tasks in one system and learn from one how to do the other and learn new tasks and all of those things, but many tasks that you weren't specifically trained for, that's generality. And then autonomy, the ability to do things without a whole bunch of human supervision and sort of humans intervening all over the place. And when you think about it that way, you recognize that we have intelligent systems. Narrow AI is like superhuman in lots of ways. And in general, we can build very powerful narrow AI if we can just identify what exactly it is that we want it to do. We have general systems. They're not totally general in the sense that, for example, they're not as good at learning new skills as humans are, but they're more general in other ways. Like no human speaks like 90 languages, and no human has a master's degree in 60 different things. That is way more general than a human is. They're general in some way, much more general and much less general in certain ways. But we have definitely general systems in that we have systems that we've trained sort of one way and do a whole mess of different tasks, from writing poetry to writing code to recognizing images to doing physics problems. Like the whole pot is in there. And that has been the direction that people have taken to make these very general systems. The ones that we've had so far have not been very good at autonomy. And if you just tell GPT-4 or Claude or something to go off and do this thing, they generally are not that great at it. Now, this is not a limitation of AI inherently. We have examples of very autonomous things, like you can remember back to the game playing systems that played StarCraft. StarCraft is a hard game to play. I don't play it, so I don't exactly know. It's complicated to just, as an agent, to figure out all the different stuff that you have to do to win StarCraft. And AI systems can just have the goal, win StarCraft, and like ruthlessly do all of the stuff that they have to do to win StarCraft at a human level, including very complex planning and strategizing and all of those things. So AI certainly can be very autonomous. We also have autonomous cars that are getting better. But what we don't have is AI that is general and intelligent and autonomous. And that's the way that I think we should think about AGI, is it's like human expert level at all of those things at once. And that is the thing that if you have a system that can do all three, then you can really replace humans. If you're missing one of them, then you can't really replace humans entirely. The humans still got to be involved somehow, because it's either too narrow or it's too weak, or it's too like weak as in not that intelligent, or it doesn't have the autonomy and humans still have to tell it what to do. So I think that is both a way to think about AGI, but it's also a way to think about not AGI, in the sense that you can choose to design systems that are deliberately lacking in one of those qualities, and then you have something that is much more manageable, doesn't replace humans, and is much more like a tool. So if you build something that just folds proteins, that's not going to take over the world by itself, and it's not going to run out of control, and it's not going to replace people either, because it's still going to take people to run that program. It's just extending their capabilities, more of a tool. Similarly, if you have something that is not that smart, but is like super general, it's going to be like GPT-4 or something, useful for lots of different things. It's just not like expert human level at any one of them, really. And again, quite useful for lots of tasks, as it has been, but isn't inherently problematic. You can't generally just take a person out and slot GPT-4 in. It's not going to work. And you can have self-driving cars, very autonomous, pretty good at what they do, but they're not going to do anything other than drive around. They're not general. And if we think about this sort of triple intersection and avoiding, maybe it's useful to show a picture of this. Let me show a picture because it's useful for something else. Is that picture visible?
Perfect.
So this is a picture of what I was just saying. You can think of these three different properties and their intersections, AGI being the triple intersection of the three. This gives you a way to get very useful AI systems that have one or two of these properties, but just not all three, and thereby avoid AGI and avoid superintelligence and avoid fully replacing both like experts and individual level humans and I think humans in general if you get to superintelligence. And also talks, so this is in answer to your question, is I think how we can think about not just it's inevitable because curves go up in like technology increase, therefore AGI inevitable. There are directions that we can go, which are to avoid the AGI danger zone in the middle, but stick to the outer regions, which are still quite powerful and still allow a huge amount of forward progress, but are not the inevitable human replacement thing.
Yeah, I think this image is very useful. I hadn't seen it before, and yeah, it basically gives you a very clear vision of where the danger zone is when all of these three overlap. What do you think? I think you've already mentioned like a lot of the sort of things that you could do with tool AI still that would be like hugely beneficial. So maybe we don't need AGI for this, but do you have any other, if you think about really positive applications of AI, what do you think would be exciting things that you'd like to see that would still be like outside of the danger zone, basically?
Yeah, I think most of the science that we want to do, most of it actually doesn't require AGI, but mostly is tools that we want. And the distinction can get a little bit tricky in the sense that, but I think if you ask, what do we need to cure cancer? Is it that we need to build some super intelligent, totally general system that can do anything in the world and then ask it, cure cancer, please, and hope it does so because we won't be able to control it? Or do we say, okay, here's some cancer researchers. What do you guys really like? Where are you stuck? Where do you really need things that you can't do now that you could do if you could understand the molecular biology better, if you could instantly analyze images out of the data and understand what they mean? So these are what tools do they actually need to be like 10x or 100x more capable as researchers, and so get the cure for cancer 10 or 100 times sooner. Of course, there are going to be limitations in the real world of doing experiments and things, but just in terms of the cognitive part. And I think those are generally tool AI type systems. So I think a lot of the science that we actually want to do, and I say this as a scientist, like what excites me is having better tools to do science with, not like having an oracle that I can ask hard science questions to and it just gives me the answer. Even if that worked, which I don't think it will, like where's the fun as a scientist? But that's a separate question as a scientist. I think there are also lots of things. Some of the things that I'm most excited about are things that socially allow us and at a societal level allow us to do things that we couldn't do before. For example, one that I give in the essay and I'm thinking a lot more about is, could we have a widely available, highly competent AI traders? So if you have a disagreement with somebody, you have a trustable, like neutral third party that you can both work with, and the third party will try to present something that is mutually agreeable to you, to both of you. And if you're happy with that, you're happy. And if not, you don't have to do anything more. But most people don't have this to settle their disagreements with people. Like it's very hard to find someone competent and neutral and available, right, that two people can work with. That is interesting, but it's not something we haven't had before. But what we haven't had before is, what if you have 1,000 people talking to the same arbiter, or 100,000 people? One AI can talk to 1,000 or 100,000 people almost as easily as two at some level. Like, it gets a little tricky with the scaling. But that's something we've never had before. We've never had an ability for 1,000 people to come to a sort of negotiated agreement by each putting in their personal preferences and wishes and getting stuff back and going back and forth. We've never had something like that. We've never had something like where you could just have a conversation between 100,000 people. So here's 100,000 people say something, the AI sees all of that and comes up with a representation of what that 100,000 people is. Maybe it's a few different things, breaks down to a few different things. Maybe it can be encapsulated into one. there's another 100,000 people that say something back, and you have a conversation with 100,000 people on each side of it. Never existed before, right? Like, this is something brand new. What does that mean we could do? And similarly, as a policymaker, you get right now, basically our democracy functions on more or less 1 bit, literally, of information every few years that like a quarter of people, a half of people provide. Like, this is a crazy small amount of information coming from the general populace to its government. There are all sorts of ways. Some of them require AI, some of them don't, but there are all sorts of ways that we could increase the bit rate of information coming from the general population to our government. And the question is, like, what does that look like? How can we go beyond voting? Voting was invented 3,000 years ago, and we're still doing it more or less the same way, by raising our hands or sticking little sheets of papyrus in together. There surely are much more information rich and interesting things that we could do. And AI allows us to do things that we simply couldn't before, because the numbers would not add up. It would take too much human. It's not like complicated labor to translate these things, but it's hard enough that you'd have to have a human do it. You don't have to have a super genius do it. You don't have to have Einstein translate things from one language to another, or tally up like how many people think one thing versus another. Like, weak but general AI systems are perfectly sufficient for this. And it's just a question of bringing them together and engineering the systems that can allow us to do these social things that we couldn't do before. So those are just some, like, there are many examples of tools that we can build to allow us to do things we couldn't do before. Many of them, when you really think through, here's a particular thing that I would like to solve, here's a problem that I have, many of them lead to, yeah, here's the kind of AI system I would like to do that. And you could always say, I want an all-powerful genie that will do anything that will solve that problem. That logically is necessarily the case. But for most of them, you can actually just think of a much more specific and controllable and safer AI system that can do that thing, and think about, how do I get that one?
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of, which is really exciting, a lot of new like AI for X type of things pop up lately. So like, I saw there was an AI for epistemics conference. There's an AI for animals conference. There's a lot of AI for science popping up now. So it's really exciting that it's maybe people's minds are going more towards that now.
Yeah.
Without AGI.
I hope so. Like, why is that? There's no other problem that we solve by saying, let's just build a general purpose thing that solves all problems and apply it to this particular problem. Like, we don't do that for anything else. And I see that as the temptation. Like, it's nice to solve more problems at once, right? And so there's an idea that it's nice to solve all problems at once. But generally, when something seems too good to be true, it is too good to be true. And I think this is what we have with AGI and superintelligence.
Yeah. I think one thing that I've often admired FLI for is that you have always tried to engage a broader crowd or audience on a lot of these issues. And I'd just be curious to hear, like, how do you think about that? Do you think, because a lot of the conversation on AI happens at like the tech or the policy level, but do you think that we should try to bring like the broader society into the discussion? And like, in what ways do you think that people could help shape the trajectory of AI's future if they should be more about?
Yeah, so absolutely. I think it's in some sense just like deeply wrong that really important decisions are being made without like any representation of the people that are going to be affected by those decisions at the table. And this is always at some level true with technology. I think there's some inevitability about that. Like, there is a certain level of expertise that when you're talking about certain things, you have to have in order to have a conversation about it. If you're talking about, is this internet protocol better or worse for society than this one, it's hard to have a very diverse set of stakeholders at the table discussing that. But when you're talking about something like, should we build smarter than human machines that can replace people entirely, that is something that A, everybody can get what that means, and B, everybody literally has a stake in. Everybody should be like reasonably at the table. And you don't have to have a PhD in machine learning to understand what the question is here. Do we build these things or not? And of course, there's a lot more subtleties. You go into the types of things that we do and don't want. Do we want AI systems what does it mean to have an AI system companion that is like loyal or disloyal, or has your interests at heart or doesn't, or is manipulative or isn't? Like, these are complex, and there are like lots of interesting normative questions. But again, those are things that we should have real conversations about. It shouldn't just be a couple of guys in Silicon Valley who are deciding what are the properties of the AI system companion that like 100 million children are interacting with every day? That should not be just their decision. There should be a lot more people involved. We strongly believe this. We are trying to reach out to lots of different groups. We have, for example, a religious engagement program, just bringing representatives from traditional or whatever religion together to talk about, how these are big questions about the future of humanity, about what it means to be human, about like ethics. The people who have thought a lot about those things, and that's like the core of what they do, should be at the table, and those perspectives should be available, and they should be learning what the directions of the technology are, and commenting and bringing that back to their constituents. Similarly, labor groups, like, again, if everybody is in principle replaceable with the machine in the labor that they do, this is like a 7-alarm fire for labor groups. And I think they have a sense that this is happening. There's been lots of technological displacement in jobs before, but there's also a real manner in which this is different, because displacement has always happened because things that people were doing were replaceable by machines, but there were still things that the people could do that the machines couldn't. And so they could move around to something new, they could retrain, they could find something else. If the machine can do everything, what do the people do? There are things that we still might intrinsically want done by people rather than machines. And there are lots of models for how, potentially an economy could work and humans could be fulfilled. But it's not obvious what that is. And it's certainly not obvious how we get from here to anything like a fulfilling economic system for most of humanity when machines can do almost all of the stuff. So even if we can envision it, which is hard, like envisioning the pathway to get there is like super hard, and everybody should be involved in that conversation if we're going to go down that path of replacing people with AGI and superintelligence. So yeah, we strongly believe that as many parties should be at the table as possible. And of course, when a table gets really big, it gets awkward, but that's not an excuse for just having it be a tiny boardroom table in the back with a few people at it.
Yeah. I think I just have one last, hopefully quick question for you, which is how, since existential hope is a big theme of this course as well, from your perspective, how do you try to cultivate a realistic but hopeful mindset around technology and AI while acknowledging these risks, basically?
Yeah, I think the crucial thing to me is having the people really involved. So I think what we've seen is if you have some complicated system like human society, and you just push it from where it is in some other direction, that other direction is not necessarily going to be better. There's no particular reason at all why it should be better. And if that direction is, for example, greater wealth for a small number of company heads, that's going to be better for that small number of company heads, but it's going to be very weakly correlated with being better for most people, right? And just general technological improvement, I think there are senses in which it sometimes makes things better, but I think it really makes things better to the extent that those technologies are both built for people and by people and for reasons that people have chosen. Like just turning technology go up does not mean that things are going to get better for people necessarily. And I think we've seen various examples where it does, and especially more recently, lots of examples where it doesn't so much. And so I think what is both some of my pessimism and much of my optimism comes from when people are deeply involved and have a hand in how what technologies we want to build, which ones we do build, and like how we use them, then we naturally use those in ways that we want. We're great at using tools. Like this is Homo sapiens, like top power. Maybe like we coordinate and we think and we use tools. Like those are what we do. We're quite good at figuring out good things to do with tools when we have some say in the matter. If we just build technology to optimize something like corporate shares or power or something like that for some small group of people, that's not going to go well for most people. So I think the danger is there, but also the answer is there of having lots of deliberate, careful human involvement and say in how these systems get developed and why. And I'm optimistic that if we can do that, if we can really have people closely involved, that like before, we will build technologies that are positive for humanity. We do have to have a chance, and we have to not just crank the dial to maximize X, whatever X might be.
Yeah, I think that's a great note to end on, and exciting actually that we have technologies now that could help us coordinate so much better and like maybe be able to do this better, basically. Yeah, thank you so much, Anthony, for taking the time. This was perfect.
Pleasure to be here.